My name is Patrick Curran, and along with my assumption-free friend Greg Hancock, we make up Quantitude. We are a podcast dedicated to all things quantitative, ranging from the relevant to the completely irrelevant. In this week's episode, Greg and I explore the very cool yet often overlooked suite of non-parametric statistical tests. We talk about their strengths and weaknesses and how these might be profitably used in practice. Along the way, we also discuss science fairs, spaghetti bridges, don't take this the wrong way, jazz hamster, the Bernoulli Principle, everyone wins, glitter is not science, speed racer, George Russell being a baby, Miles Davis, and the conch shell. We hope you enjoy this week's episode.
I know that historically you and Andrea were really involved in the kids' school stuff. Did you ever find yourself a judge at a science fair?
I was indeed. Because of my extensive engineering, mathematical, architectural, physics background, they chose me to be the judge on making bridges out of spaghetti.
Ooh.
Now, to clarify, dried spaghetti. And
bummer for that one kid who didn't know that, but okay.
But drawing on my extensive engineering background, I walked around and said, that looks like a bridge. Yeah, that looks like a bridge.
So I was thinking about this last night. I remember walking around all of the different trifold posters. And in my head, I had somehow expected like a whole bunch of, vinegar volcanoes. Remember the,
oh, yeah, sure.
Or like potato batteries. But the kinds of things that kids had posters on were things like, does eating candy make you smarter? And you look at it and there's some kid who ate a bag of Skittles and then took a math test and to see how well he did. And this was it. And so many of the posters were almost like something you would get out of BuzzFeed, some gotcha kind of headline. It was really interesting.
Now, were you a judge of this?
I was a judge.
Okay.
I had to go around and interview the kids.
So we had a rule when my kids were growing up that you can't start a sentence with, don't take this the wrong way. I'm going to suspend that momentarily. Don't take this the wrong way. You must have been insufferable as a judge.
Don't take this the wrong way.
Nope, you can't say that. There's a rule.
Oh, okay. So, asshole, why are you saying that?
Well, you do have a math chemistry background and you have a statistics background and a research design background. And I just kind of envision you running some fifth grader through the Spanish Inquisition of was the control group truly double blind or not?
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Well, okay. I mean, there may be a little of that. Like, there was this one poster I remember. It was called Jazz Hamster. And the kid brought the hamster. The hamster was in a wheel. And the experiment was, I think he played like Metallica for the hamster. And something like the Wiggles, which I know your affinity for the Wiggles.
Oh, big red car, man.
Big red car.
Toot toot, chugga chugga, big red car. We travel near and we travel far.
And then he played smooth jazz, I think like Kenny G.
Oh, God, was he trying to, torture the rat?
Right, well, the only thing that the hamster would run to was the Kenny G.
He's trying to get away from it. He's like, oh, my God.
Exactly.
We all run when we hear Kenny G.
But what am I supposed to do with this? He's got one hamster. If he does the Kenny G first and the hamster's exhausted, he's not going to run to the Metallica. All of these confounds are coming up in my head. But so instead, you just sort of recalibrate and you go around and you talk to the kids and ask them what principles are at work and all of this. So I tried not to be the insufferable person that you're assuming that I was. But it was really hard. And what happened was there were a number of parents who were serving as judges, and we had to provide A rating. So it wasn't like there was a detailed rubric, which offended my measurement sensibilities, obviously. But we got into this room and then we were going to talk about it. And there were sort of like two types of parents in the room. One type of parent who would be, all the kids tried really hard. They made really nice posters. I just gave them all a 10.
And then there was you.
And then it wasn't me specifically. But I remember this one dad where he's in the room and he literally says, the kid couldn't even explain the Bernoulli Principle. And I said something that might have been snarky, like, it's true, the fate of civilization would be pretty bleak if we left it to 9-year-olds. So he had these very grand expectations. And one of the things that made it even more challenging, and I bet you experienced this too, was it's hard to know where the line is between what the kids did and what the parents did. So a really mediocre project might be mediocre because the fourth grader did it all by themselves, and a really good-looking project might not be their work at all. So that was kind of hard to sort through, too.
Yeah. My experience with the spaghetti bridge, I bet I could sort with 100% accuracy which ones the parents were involved in and which ones they weren't, because there were these spaghetti bridges that were like literally the kids were putting Scotch tape on them as I approached as the judge. And then there was one that I was like, I could walk across this right now. Like, I'm a 180-pound man, and this is going to support me. And Mom is standing over there with this Cheshire cat grin because she was the principal architect of the new wing at Duke University Hospital. I'm like, give me a break.
And I'm standing in front of Jazz Hamster. So what happened in that room when the parents came together was I actually suggested that we change the scoring. And because we had
aforementioned insufferability.
I have a 6-page document I've assembled here. If we could take a look. No. The plan was that they would just take the ratings of the parents and average them, which is sensible if parents are discriminating among the things that were there, but they really weren't. Some of them were just pegging everything at 10, and some were like 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 because of the Bernoulli Principle. And I just said something that I wouldn't ordinarily say. Why don't we just rank?
Ooh.
Each of you provide a rank of all of the projects. And then we can go from there, because otherwise people weren't forcing any discrimination among them. So I tried to go from these numbers on a 1 to 10 scale that people thought were going to be really useful to something that was just rank ordered.
And how was that taken?
Well, the goal in the end, there was to be a winner or a set of winners associated with the science fair. I know, right? Now, there were a lot of other, most creative poster. There's all of that. But we had to come up with a decision. And I suggested that we just do a ranking of the projects. And people said, sure, let's do that. And it seemed to help what we were trying to achieve.
Folks, the disdain on Greg's face when he said most creative poster, there was an eye roll and kind of a rocking head back and forth. And so
glitter is not science.
But second, my kids went to this project-based community school. There were no winners, except the kids would all identify who was best. And so it made things almost worse because it became this Lord of the Flies thing at the science fair of who's going to hold the conch shell.
What's going on? Okay, listen up. Whoever holds the conch gets to speak. That's the rule.
Yeah, it was bad.
Well, so where this is going, which should be obvious by now, is that...
To everyone but me?
No, even to Patrick. We're so accustomed to dealing with numbers that we manipulate in very specific ways. We take means, we compute standard deviations and variances, and we do statistics based on those kinds of things. But sometimes that's not really what we need. And I don't mean that we can just make things simpler. Those things might not even be appropriate for the data that we have. And this is a distinction statistically between what we talk about as parametric statistical procedures and non-parametric statistical procedures. And it would be fun to focus just a little bit on introducing non-parametrics to folks.
And there's the pivot.
Ding.
Well done.
Thank you.
I am actually a huge fan of rankings. And speaking of Formula One...
Oh, were we?
Formula One is fascinating. There are 20 cars that run a Formula One race, and all 20 cars clock your fastest time. And they have it to the 1,000th of a second, but you're ranked 1 to 20. The top 15 go to next qualifying. They do it again. The top 10 go to the final qualifying, and they do it again.
So there's never a tie?
There was actually a race back in the late 90s where the top 3 cars on the grid had the same time to the 1,000th of a second.
Wow, that is crazy.
It is amazing! I cannot believe this! Heinz Harald Frentzen has done exactly the same time as Jacques Villeneuve and Michael Schumacher, with a time exactly the same to the nearest 1,000th of a second.
There's massive precision in all of this measurement, laser coded to the 1,000th of a second, but then the finish of the race, time is irrelevant. Who came in first? Who came in second? Who came in third?
Yeah, I remember stuff like that from watching Speed Racer as a kid. That's the extent of my Formula One knowledge, honestly. Did you watch that cartoon as a kid?
Oh, Speed Racer!
Yeah. That was the best.
Here comes Speed Racer. He's a demon on wheels. Go, Speed Racer, go!
All right, so let me put you on the spot here and ask you what for you characterizes parametric statistics, just as a frame of reference.
This is one of those things that we use every day, but we don't think a lot about. What we can think of with parametric statistics is what are assumptions that we invoke about the nature of the population in terms of parameters that govern particular distributions that, and here's the kicker, may or may not hold in the population, but we are going to assume certain features so we can do things with that.
Yeah, and included in that is the nature of the scores themselves, right? We tend to just imagine that everything we deal with is intervally scaled to the point where we assume it maybe at times when we shouldn't be assuming that. And so part of the, quote, distributional assumptions or assumptions about the data is that the numbers themselves are coming from scales that are at least interval, which sometimes isn't that egregious, but other times assuming interval properties is really a bad thing to do, and it can lead us to very poor inferences on the back end when we're doing these parametric statistical tests. So assumptions about the nature of the scales and the distribution, we rely so heavily on that in just about all the stuff we do every day.
And not to belabor the F1 example, but it actually is a really good one. The finishing in the race is unambiguously an ordinal measure.
Yeah.
So Oscar Piastri comes in first, Lando Norris comes in second, and George Russell, who I do not like because I think George is a big baby and complains about everything.
Nothing I could do, he just turned into me. Did my best.
You turn right into him, George.
Okay, plenty of space.
I mean, you didn't, George. You drove straight into the side of him.
Okay.
George Russell comes in third place.
Wait, where did Lewis Hamilton come in, by the way?
We are not talking about that right now. Lewis is not having a good year.
Oh, well, we still love him. He still has hot abs, right?
All right, first, second, third. That's ordinal. Well, Oscar comes in first. Lando is half a second behind Oscar, and George is 32 seconds behind Lando, which really does happen.
Oscar Piastri wins the Chinese Grand Prix, and Lando Norris, he's got second place. George Russell completes the podium.
The timing is interval, but the finishing of the race is ordinal. Well, why would you make these assumptions about interval scaling and parameters that govern very specific population distributions? Well, we're actually getting something for that. It's not that we're lazy. It's not like we don't understand the Bernoulli Principle like some stunted fourth grader. We get something for that, but we have to pay the reaper in the process.
Yeah, And you're talking a lot about ranks and orders, and those really are the food for a lot of the non-parametric procedures. They deal with things like scores in ranking terms rather than in their raw metric. Sometimes they deal simply with the signs of things. If I was taking a difference between two things, how often is that difference positive? How often is that difference negative? It might deal with resampling or permutation type procedures. Honestly, the principles of non-parametric procedures seem like things that someone at the science fair maybe could have come up with,
fourth
right?
grader has a future in non-parametric statistics. So imagine that you go out in the backyard and there are 10 different things laying out in the backyard of different sizes. Now we could say, okay, we're going to weigh each one. We're going to get an exact value of the weight. We can get a mean. We can get a standard deviation, right? But the other one is you and I work for a state university, and we really try to minimize the amount of work we do in any given day. And go out and instead just pick them up and set them down and line them up heaviest to lightest, right? I really don't care how much they weigh. Well, that's a really nice balancing of parametric, of do we get this numerical ratio scaled mean, standard deviation, distribution of those things? Or do you just say, I don't care. I want to know the heavy and the light. Just go do that.
Yeah, and oftentimes answers the question.
Dude, that was horrible.
Oh, okay.
No, do it again. Try again.
Wait, let's hear it. Oh, sorry, my embouchure. My embouchure needs work.
Okay, anyway, continue, please.
Yeah, thank you. So the point that you're making is that we have research questions, and we want to pick our statistical methods that certainly align with the assumptions of the data and the scales that we have and all that, but also just something that answers our question. And sometimes, insert noise here, there we go, is good enough to answer the question. So what I thought we might do is go through a few different scenarios where there are classic non-parametric methods. I mean, there are people doing work in non-parametric stuff all the time, trying to take the more sophisticated methods that we keep creating in the parametric world and come up with non-parametric alternatives. But let's just stay sort of at the foundational ideas and talk about some different scenarios. And I think what people will see is these really are not difficult ideas at all.
And we want you to think about questions in your own day-to-day life. Think about when in your work are you really focused on a 0.5 difference on this numerical scale versus, well, just more often than not, are people who are higher on this thing, do they tend to be higher on this other thing?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, that's what we're really interested in. And this is another one of those, someone should have told you about this. I got to tell you, I teach a boatload of grad classes, and I don't know if I even use this term.
Totally same. And in the back of my mind, there's this guilt that I'm not explaining other ways to do it. But hey, we got a curriculum. We got stuff we got to cover. And it's a whole, for sure.
What was that word you used? Guilt? Guilt?
You're Catholic.
I'm going to have
You know that word. Okay.
Oh,
that.
What my mom would say about non-parametrics. Okay, I'm with you.
Okay. Well, let's start with a very common scenario for us, and that's where we want to, and I'm going to say it very generically, compare two, we'll say, independent groups. And when I say compare them, I mean we just want to know which one tends to be higher in terms of the scores.
Okay.
And if I was thinking about this in the context of science fair stuff, imagine I had a hamster running to Kenny G and maybe a hamster running to Miles Davis. And I'm guessing that the hamster would just lay down and chill for Miles Davis. So that might be an experiment that someone would want to do. Now, in the parametric world, how will you facilitate a comparison there?
I would do a standard two-group independent t-test.
Okay.
Maybe you count the number of revolutions of the treadmill under condition A for hamsters. And then you said it was independent. So we got another group of hamsters and we count the number of revolutions under Miles Davis, of which there are going to be none because they're going to be going, oh, dude. But anyway, so we get some mean of those within the group. We get some variance of those within the group. Here's the first assumption we're going to make. We're going to assume what is sometimes called homogeneity of variance or homoskedasticity, which is a lovely word. And that means that they are within sampling variability, equal variance within each group, and that allows us to pool the variance estimates. What we do is we get a standardized deviate of the difference in means between those two groups, but here's where the parametric part comes in. Well, what the hell do you do with that? Well, thanks to Gossett, brought to you by Guinness Brewery.
Clubs, everyone!
We want to know what is the probability we would have observed a mean difference this large or larger if there was no mean difference in the population. And to determine a probability of that is foundationally based on that t-distribution for given degrees of freedom. And that's what we're assuming in the parametric.
One of the things that you said there that is really, really important is that this is a test of the difference in means. What if I said, would the difference between medians still answer your question? How would you feel about that?
Mean is you just add up the scores and divide by how many you have. Importantly, that incorporates every numerical value for every hamster, right? However many it is, it goes in. Now, the median is you're going to rank up the scores and find the middle one. And often how you can teach about this is imagine scores are weights and you put them on a board. The mean is going to be where the fulcrum would go to balance it. The weight to the left is equal to the weight to the right. Now, notice those are the numerical values of the scores that you're balancing out. The median is saying half the scores are to the left and half the scores are to the right. It's still a measure of central tendency, but holy crap, that's really different.
That's right. And so one of the things with non-parametric methods that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle is that there might be distinctions between the hypotheses that are being tested in the parametric world and the ones that are being tested in the non-parametric world. In the non-parametric world, for this two-sample scenario, the test that's most commonly used is something called the Mann-Whitney U-test, and it really is a comparison of medians. So testing whether or not one population has a higher median than another. And you have to first and foremost be okay with that. Because if you were articulating null and alternative hypotheses, they would be in terms of the medians. And if you're not okay with that, then you have to pause. But if that's still kind of getting at your question, then we're in the right place here, because what you have to do with the Mann-Whitney U-test, again, crazy simple. You've got two independent groups of scores. Imagine that you just throw them all into one big pot and you rank them from highest to lowest. Now, every single case, rather than just their original score, they have a rank. And what I can do is I can compute the sum of all the ranks for the scores that came from one of the groups and the sum of all the ranks that came from the scores for the other groups. And if one of the groups on average is having higher ranks than the other, then we know that they must be centered overall in a different location. And where this thing called U comes in, because it's a Mann-Whitney U statistic, it's essentially asking how many times one group's ranks wind up exceeding the other group's ranks. And in the end, there is a table of critical values for this U statistic, or if you have large enough sample sizes, then it starts to converge upon a fairly normal distribution. And then you get your p-values out like you're accustomed to getting p-values out. And Bob's your hamster, you wind up reaching a conclusion about whether or not the medians differ or not. And that answers your question, or a version of your question.
It does. And you may be listening and saying, I mean, who cares? As they're both measures of central tendency. Well, go back to the visual image of your scores as weights on this board. It's not an analogy. It physically works this way. Imagine each score having a weight, and you put it on a 2x4, and you put that balance point on the 2x4 where it's perfectly horizontal. That's the mean. Now, while it's sitting there, go ahead and grab the highest score and start sliding it down the board. Well, the fulcrum kind of freaks out, and it says, oh, crap, I'm not in balance anymore, and the mean starts following that score. And as you slide out that score, that fulcrum is following that along because it is paid to balance the board. So each individual score has the potential of impacting the mean. Now, rank order them where it's just lowest to highest and the median is the 50th percentile. Start sliding that upper score. Median doesn't move. Median doesn't care.
Not at all.
That's not what it's paid to do. Half is below me, half is above me, and dude, you can rent a car and drive to Orlando if you want. I'm not moving as long as you're above. It is robust to outliers because it's not getting jammed up in the thousandths of a second separating Piastri and Norris.
As they go side by side across the line.
0.0.
It says, I just don't care. The top 10 cars are in the upper half, the bottom 10 cars are in the lower half, and I just really don't care.
Yep, you're the fastest hamster. That's all I care about. And this technique, the way we're describing it, is for comparing two independent groups. If you have three or more independent groups, there's an extension of this, sometimes called a Kruskal-Wallis test or a Kruskal-Wallis-H test. And we don't need to get into that. We just need to know that the same principles are there. If you have multiple groups, you can take the scores from all the groups, mix them up, rank them, and then you have information about which group's scores tend to wind up being ranked more highly than the others. But it all comes down to these really simple principles. And if you have data whose interval properties are questionable, or as Patrick described, which is really important, if you have data for which there are grossly outlying cases or wacky distributions, Mann-Whitney U-test or the Kruskal-Wallis extension are just sitting there going, hey, that's what I do, as long as you're okay with testing the median instead of the mean. So now let's imagine that the groups that we have are dependent, right? Not independent groups anymore. They're dependent.
The same hamsters. But what if they're baked in the Miles Davis one and then listen to Kenny G? You've got serious order effects.
I can imagine you in that parent room, but maybe the hamster is totally baked. Okay.
Hey, man. Am I driving okay? I think we're parked, man.
In another example, maybe the kid who did math problems after eating a giant bag of Skittles, maybe we measured that kid's math ability before eating the Skittles and measured the math ability after eating the Skittles. That's another example.
Or if the kid were baked.
Which is why he wanted Skittles. No, they're fourth graders. Anyway.
He might finally understand the Bernoulli Principle.
Wow, the difference in pressure is causing a vacuum effect. Hey, where are those Skittles? All right, so if I tell you I have dependent groups and I'm interested in knowing which group is higher, just generally speaking, how do you think about that with your parametric hat on?
Just a dependent t-test. So to be very similar to what I described before, but you have to do a little bit of work with the standard error because they're coming from the same person. But more or less, I would take the mean of whatever condition A was, the mean of whatever condition B was, and then there are machinations you do to address that they're not independent.
Yeah, and there are different ways that can be done computationally. One is to adjust the standard error by getting the correlation between the scores worked into that standard error to accommodate that. The other is just to think about it from a difference score perspective, right, where I take the kids' scores or the hamster scores before and after, and I compute a difference, and in the end, that winds up leading to the exact same dependent samples t-test. The reason I mention the difference thing, though, is imagine imagine we have that whole list of differences. Some are positive, maybe, some are negative, maybe some might even be zero. We could take all of those differences and we could rank them from the largest to the smallest. So there'd be some really big that are positive, there's some really big that are negative. And then what we could do is we can go in and count how many of those differences wound up being positive, how many of those wound up being negative. And this is the basis for something called the Wilcoxon signed rank test, where you go through and you rank the differences that you have in terms of absolute magnitude. Then you reassign the signs to those particular ranks. And you're basically asking, is there a significantly higher number of positive differences than there are negative differences there? Again, this is not spaghetti bridge building. This is pretty easy kind of stuff. And there is a distribution for the Wilcoxon test, especially useful when you've got sample sizes that are on the smaller side, like smaller than 25. But this winds up converging to distributions that are more familiar as sample sizes get larger. It starts to asymptotically approach a z-test. And again, we're getting at the same thing. Do people tend to be higher on the post-test than the pre-test or lower? Simply by comparing the ranks of those differences. Pretty straightforward.
And it just scales up. And so if you have more conditions, you have the Friedman test.
Yep.
You can do all sorts of modifications to this to try to get you into the comparisons that you want. But everything you've talked about so far have been more comparisons of mean, median, level, rank. But a lot of what we like to do is tie stuff together.
Yeah.
So how would you go about doing that here?
Oh, sure. Like when we think about correlation or we think about regression, where it's all about the relations among variables. When we have two variables and we want to know how they're related with your parametric hat on, how do you handle that?
Covariance.
Okay, that's your unstandardized answer. What would your standardized answer be?
Correlation.
There you go. And correlation, the word by itself, means a number of different things. But usually when people say correlation, they mean the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient. Well, Spearman also had a version of a correlation. Of course he did, probably in a footnote somewhere. But the whole idea of Spearman's rho is just that it is a rank correlation. If we took all of the scores on X and ranked them, and all of the scores on Y and ranked them, essentially Spearman's rho is like a Pearson correlation, but using the rank values rather than the original score values.
And that's it. It is simple as that. Again, it's the fourth grader's trifold.
Yeah.
How then, though, would you get some kind of inferential test from that?
Yeah, well, there actually is a Spearman table for assessing rho, and that's, again, the behavior of that statistic for when we have smaller n's. But when you start to get n's like around 30 or higher, there's a conversion of this to something that's pretty close to a t statistic, and then we wind up using the t distribution. But the nice thing is we know that when we're doing a Pearson correlation, you get some wacky outlier that's way out there in left field, that is just going to jerk your correlation up or jerk your correlation down so that it is not really representative of the relation at all. And the nice thing about the rank procedure that Spearman had is the same as you said before. It's not going to care really about how far that thing is out. It's just like, oh, that's a higher rank value or a lower rank value. And so it's much less influenced by those kinds of issues, which is very, very nice.
That starts getting me to my next question is we could talk for an hour about all the different kinds of non-parametric tests there are. And there are dozens and dozens of these things that live out in the world.
Oh, yeah.
But why the heck do we not teach it? And why the heck do we rarely, if ever, see these in practice? I mean, it sounds pretty compelling if they work better in small samples, if they're robust to outliers, if they don't require this interval scaling. That seems like a lot of really good things. Why don't we use them more?
It's a great question, and shame on us to some extent for not making the time to be able to weave this in. There's a universe somewhere, it doesn't happen to be the one that we live in, but there's a universe somewhere where we teach the parametric thing, and then we follow it up by a non-parametric version of that, and then talk about when someone might choose one versus the other. Again, that's just not the universe we happen to live in. I don't know if it's because the parametric curriculum just keeps expanding and so we jam more stuff in there. But shame on us, first of all. Second of all, I think in general, given the choice between a parametric procedure and a non-parametric procedure, even though in my soul I would like to rely on far fewer assumptions, you may get more power when you are using a parametric procedure. You may. It's not actually a guarantee, but you may if you are willing to sell your soul to the assumptions that the parametric procedure is based on.
And that's paying the reaper, right? Everything we do in statistics is paying the reaper. When you meet the assumptions, the parametric have higher power and you're more likely to detect an effect if an effect really exists. But that only holds when you meet assumptions. When you do not meet assumptions, all bets are off. But I have a 2-bit opinion about why we don't teach it as much and why we don't see it as much. And I'm going to tap into my innate defensiveness. I think these were much more applicable back in the day. And they are less so now because, quite honestly, I feel like we've gotten better at parametric methods. So when do non-parametric methods work really well? Well, it's flexible in scaling. Right? We can have ordinal items. We can have even binary items. We can have anything we want. So it's very, very flexible in that way. It's robust to outliers. You can move that higher score up and down, and the median is not going to move as long as it's in the upper half. It works well in small samples because a lot of the parametric methods, asymptotic goodies don't come online until you have larger samples. And then back in the day, a huge advantage that is just irrelevant now is they were computationally simple, right? Is doing maximum likelihood in the 50s. Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how you would do that. I mean, people did, it was...
Teams of graduate students had to do it.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of those, well, we have really good methods for dealing with discrete items. We have good methods for doing sensitivity analysis to identify potential outliers. We have good methods for making small sample adjustments. And then computational efficiency is just irrelevant. Does it take a millionth of a second or 2 millionths of a second to do it? Nobody cares.
Convenience Centerette can make you a meal from packet to plate in 15.5 seconds.
Morrison's have got one that can do that in 8 seconds. Lucky things.
Yeah, I think everything you said makes a lot of sense, but I'm going to throw out one exception, and that is the type of non-parametric procedure that is bootstrapping. Oh, right.
I like bootstrapping.
There you go, right? So bootstrapping is something that is extraordinarily useful, can fall within the non-parametric family, and I think is probably something that you and I, even though we poke at it and, have made sort of offhand comments about it here and there, I think it might be good to unpack that a little bit more in a future episode.
Oh, I would like that. Maybe that's a good wrapping up point. Bootstrapping is one of those things that for me verges on magic. And we will talk about this when we get there, but it seems like it's something that is unfair and should never work. Right? You resample from your own data and then you fit things thousands of times and gather it together. And it's like, it's not fair.
Yep.
But it freaking works.
That's right.
Okay, I'll throw you a bone on this one.
Okay.
If we treat bootstrapping as non-parametric, which it is, then that plays a pretty important role in things that we do.
So that's your jazz hamster is what I'm hearing you say.
Dude. It's my Miles Davis hamster. I can see sound. It's beautiful.
On that note, thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Take care. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for joining us. You can subscribe to Quantitude on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you go for things to keep you going when you're on your hamster wheel. You can also follow us on X, Blue Sky, or Instagram, where we are at QuantitudePod. And visit our website, quantitudepod.org, where you can leave us a message, find organized playlists, show notes, syllabi, and other fun stuff. Finally, get cool Quantitude merch from redbubble.com, where all proceeds from non-bootleg authorized Quantitude Pod merch go to donorschoose.org to help support low-income schools. In the spirit of remaking classic statistical procedures into non-parametric versions, today's episode has been sponsored by the American film industry, with its frequent habit of remaking classic films. Inspired by today's Quantitude episode, movies currently in production include remakes of that dystopian sci-fi classic The Matrix, to be redone as the Spearman Rank Correlation Matrix. And the Marvel Universe franchise Spider-Man is set to be rebranded as Spider-Man Whitney. And that Oscar-winning classic, Good Will Hunting, Good Will Coxswain Hunting. How about something animated for the kids? Puss in Boots, Puss in Bootstraps. And finally, coming out next year, the teen classic Mean Girls will be updated as, what else? Median Girls. You've been listening to Quantitude, the podcast that rests on as few assumptions as possible, like the assumption of accuracy, or quality, or enjoyability, or...